You're back with us on About Buildings and Cities. I'm Luke Jones. He's George Gingell.
I'm George Gingell.
Yes.
Who are you?
I'm Luke Jones.
Who are we?
We're a podcast.
And together we are
a podcast called About Buildings and Cities. And we just recorded quite a while without having the recorder on. It's definitely on now, yeah.
Luke was telling me all about Brian Eno.
We've gone all over this again. I'm going to have to try and remember to do it again.
But we're not going to talk exclusively about Brian Eno, although strangely he is the most quoted source in this particular literary work, which is called How Buildings Learn. Now, are you going to tell me about the book and who wrote it, more particularly?
How Buildings Learn, What Happens After They're Built is a book by Stewart Brand.
When did it come out?
It came out in the early 90s, about 1994 in this country and possibly a year before in the United States. Stewart Brand, principally known for the Whole Earth catalogue, which we've just immediately a minute ago completely described, and then we're going to have to do it all over
for
again.
About 10 minutes.
That's okay, yeah. How Buildings Learn is a book which is about buildings in time. It's about what happens to buildings as they are lived in, occupied, used, and the ways in which they develop. And it's kind of a polemic against what Brand sees as a habit of principally architects fixing buildings in a kind of perfect and unchanging state at the moment that they're designed and built, and then and not really allowing for a process of evolution and growth, or as he terms it, flow.
That's sort of one thing it's about, although I would say, in fact, it is a book without a polemic.
Yeah. Well,
it has an attitude.
Yeah.
And that is one of the pillars of the attitude.
This is what it's taken to be about. So we should say, because I said it once before, that the way we review books is to talk about the whole book and all the things which are said in the book, which is often somewhat at odds with what the book is sort of taken to be about, the particular kind of place it occupies in the constellation of references that people have.
Because I've only read the book, you might have to tell me what the popular conception is.
Well, I think it's not totally off. It's identified with an increasing interest in sort of post-occupancy studies, in thinking about and being interested in maintenance, in designing for what they call loose fit. So
these were definitely ideas that were being banged around when we were studying architecture.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he at the very least, he identifies a bunch of issues that were going to go on to be quite fashionable. I think the book is a not all that effective explanation of some quite interesting ideas.
You might be onto something there.
Yeah. Okay, so to say something about Brand, if you don't know him, Whole Earth catalogue was what made him famous. It's the reason why Brian Eno is his friend and features so much in the book, presumably.
Brian Eno features so much, and I couldn't work out why Brian Eno was in it, that I went to the trouble of Googling to see if there was another Brian Eno who was an architect or in some way related to building design. And no, it is Brian Eno.
It's the same Brian Eno,
of Roxy Music and subsequent solo career.
Yeah, music for airports. So, Whole Earth catalogue is this sort of strange... It's considered to be an extremely influential moment in the kind of emerging culture of the West Coast, of the Californian ideology. There are all kinds of people who go on to be extremely influential and do big things, your kind of Steve Jobses and Kevin Kellys. So Whole Earth catalogue, it was like a catalogue. It's like a kind of almanac, I would say, is really the form. It was a kind of self-produced periodical done with kind of classic cut and paste printing and production, and it's full of essentially the rule for what gets included is anything that was interesting, anything that was cool, anything that was kind of aligned with the vibe. There's a quote from the page of the first, a classically sort of grandiose quote, where Brand says, "We are as gods and might as well get good at it." Kind of historically, power, he says, had been in the hands of government, big business, formal education and the church. But now a realm of intimate personal power is developing. Power of the individual to conduct his own education, find his own inspiration, shape his own environment and share his adventure with whoever is interested. Tools that aid this process are sought and promoted by the Whole Earth catalogue. And in the context of the catalogue, that might include everything from like places where you can buy a mobile sawmill to instructions on how to make geodesic domes and other like experimental structures. Lots and lots of apparently quite kind of random stuff.
It strikes me as like one in the genre of like really aspirational magazines, like Monocle or something, except or like Condé Nast Traveler.
It's kind of like
instead of being like a really rich old money person or like an international
but for like the Manson family,
you're going to be well, possibly, but certainly for like certainly for a kind of hippie Superman. Who's going to, build a space elevator in his back garden.
It's kind of the dream, yeah. Like, I think that they spent quite a lot of time like rolling around in a sort of camper van selling these things to people.
I think it's more like being McAfee,
living the John McAfee life.
Living the John McAfee life, sort of.
Well, he had kind of lived that life. So he was part of Ken Casey's like big acid swilling gang who used to sort of roll around. They were called the Merry Pranksters, and they used to roll around in a...
I bet they were great fun to know.
I think they probably were fun to be in the gang, maybe. So he literally like appears in Tom Wolfe's book about them. He crops up in all kinds of things. His Wikipedia page has got a lot of random stuff where you think, well, I wonder how that happened. Like, he was literally like technical assistant for a famous... tech demo called The Mother of All Demos, which is in
Xerox. That's with the mouse, where they did the mouse.
Yeah, the
mouse.
I'm not sure it was at Xerox actually. I think that a lot of people went to Xerox. But yeah, it's the first like mouse window graphical user interface demo. He wasn't involved in that particularly, but for some reason he was kind of helping with the presentation.
He's a Mother All Demos groupie.
I don't know. Like Whole Earth Catalogue, I find is very weird. It feels like it has a sort of enormous cultural surface area still, but now does anyone actually like go back and look at what's actually in it?
As we said in the bit that we lost due to technical difficulties, that's true of every single book that we cover. No one reads them, often because they're badly written and boring.
But we might well read it for a bonus episode.
It looks actually like there's a lot of pictures for the amount of words, which is something I greatly appreciate. Work of architectural theory.
Yeah. I mean, it's not really a work of architectural theory. I don't know what it is, but it is something like there's a famous graduation address that Steve Jobs gave, which is a kind of condensed distillation of like Jobsiana, Jobsismo. He talks about this for ages in this as like the inspiration that crystallized what he wanted to do and what he wanted to do with the personal computer and all this sort of thing. The term personal computer actually is attributed to Stewart Brand. It's a Brand coinage, apparently.
There we go.
So that's
clearly a very important person.
Yeah,
great intellect. So what do you think in his later life he did with architectural occupancy studies?
Well, yeah, it's kind of weird, isn't it? So this is like some way after the heyday. After Whole Earth Catalogue, he then set up a kind of early web sort of portal forum thing called The Well. And he also seems to have been doing quite a lot of consulting, because he talks about fitting out the office for his consultancy, which has a strange name. Like it's called like Global
Consultancy. That's what you do when your career's failed, isn't it?
I don't know. I think it's what you do when you don't want to work all the time, isn't
it? That's true, yeah.
When you want to just clock in and do a little bit. Which has a funny business. It's called like Global Business Partners or something like that. Anyway, we'll come to that later because he does talk about it in the book. But to return to the subject at hand, How Buildings Learn is a book about architecture, which he'd not previously written all that much about.
Oh, do you think it tells ever?
Well, in the TV show, he says, I spent 6 years working on this problem because I was so vexed by why buildings were so bad. And this is my answer. And I think it's kind of worth unpicking. Let's have a go. So basically...
It's got a nice format. It's very wide.
Yeah.
It's a kind of similar format to the Stuttgart Institute of Lightweight Technology books.
Yeah.
But not quite as narrow.
A4 landscape. Yeah, sort of A4-ish landscape, isn't it? It's nice. I'm just going to do a little quote from the book because he very helpfully says what the argument is. He has a quote which begins, "The argument is as follows. Buildings are layered in different rates of change." Chapter 2. Adaptation is easiest in cheap buildings that no one cares about. Chapter 3. and most refined in long-lasting, sustained purpose buildings. Chapter 4. Adaptation, however, is anathema to architects and most of the building professions. Chapter 5. And the gyrations of real estate markets sever continuity in buildings. Chapter 6. The building preservation movement arose in rebellion, deliberately frustrating creative architects and the free market in order to restore continuity. Chapter 7. Focus on preservation brought a new focus on maintenance. Chapter 8. And respect for humble older buildings brought investigation of their design wisdom by vernacular building historians. Chapter 9. The same kind of investigation can be made of the persistent change, mostly amateur, that occurs in contemporary houses. Chapter 10. With that perspective back, it's possible to rethink perspective forward. Chapter 11. And to imagine designing buildings that invite adaptation. Chapter 12. And that's the end. I guess we'll begin at the beginning.
I think so, yeah. That makes sense.
His big sort of theory is about this idea of flow. So that buildings change over their lives, that they learn by being adapted and physically transformed by their users or occupiers or people with a right to interfere in them in some way. The kind of early parts of the book contain quite a lot of like sort of photographic documentation of different examples of this happening in different ways. But he has a kind of theorization of how change works, which is this idea of shearing layers. This is the big sort of theoretical, it's the big sort of theory bit, basically, of the book. It has a diagram, and the idea is that we need to think about how different bits of buildings, different layers of stuff, change at different rates. And he has these 6 layers, the outermost of which
he actually gets from something else, right? Except
yeah,
he adds sight to it.
He adds another one as well,
and
yeah.
Stuff.
So and this is an adaptation of an idea that he gets from one of his major interlocutors, who's a otherwise not very well known British architect called Frank Duffy, and who's quoted extensively in the book. I mean, one of the things in the book is that he gives like extensive verbatim quotations from people, which gives it like quite a strange...
Like Brian Eno and the Duchess of Devonshire.
And the Duchess of Devonshire, yeah, his twin stars. So the 6 layers are, on the outside, skin, which is... And in the diagram, they've all got different thicknesses, which indicate how permanent they are, how often they change. So skin, the outermost layer, which is like not that thick, but thicker than a lot of the others.
Well, sight is the outermost layer.
Well, sight is the bottom layer, yeah.
Okay.
Sight doesn't change. Skin changes quite a bit. Structure doesn't really change. That's the thickest of the kind of building layers. And then you've got services, space plan, and stuff. And stuff at space plan are both very fine lines. They change all the time. Services change quite a bit. Skin changes a bit more than that. Structure changes least of all the layers of the building. And then sight is this kind of permanent thing. And he has various little photographic studies of different buildings which explore these different things. So he has like this study of, I think it's originally a US Army hospital or something.
The Soldiers' Home in Washington, D.C.
Yes. Which is a 19th century building which kind of... has a sort of original layout with verandas and a fairly stubby tower, and then later the tower gets bigger, and then later the tower gets even grander, and bits kind of get, the facade sort of comes out and this kind of thing. He has a study of a building called the Cliff House in San Francisco, which has like...
that's a really funny example of how buildings adapt, because it's a building which is destroyed.
Well,
like
the point, yeah, no, well, the point of that one
process.
is that the building like gets completely destroyed multiple times, but the site is still the same site. So it's kind of demonstrating that particular layer of the like temporal diagram. And then he does also have a sort of, he also makes the point that generally the different types of buildings change at different rates as well, so that broadly like institutional buildings tend to have a longer life, and commercial and residential buildings tend to have a sort of shorter one, or certainly a more mutable one. That's the basic sort of theory of change.
Certainly in the first chapter.
Yeah.
Because in a way, something we'll notice in the book is that there's a series of chapters, and they feel like essays where he's exploring an idea.
Yeah.
Usually there'll be a number of examples.
Yeah.
Which are kind of type examples. like, this is a type. I'm going to like talk about this as a sort of example. There'll be some sort of notion of what's linking them.
Yeah.
And I would not say in the book, although he has got that kind of summation at the beginning of like what each of these stages is going to say, it isn't a work which progresses one foot in front of the other towards a kind of logical conclusion. It's like a series of essays.
Yeah.
And between them, in a way, I wouldn't say like that diagram of, you know, skin and services and stuff isn't used in a kind of consistent way to explore things. It's just brought up once as a kind of framing structure. And then, in a way, he talks about things differently in different stages. And it's kind of like that. Like, that's what the work is kind of like.
Yeah. So the first, like, 3 or 4 chapters of the book lay out his theory of how buildings change, and then also, like, how certain types of buildings change successfully. And he has these 2 categories of buildings that like handle change or handle time successfully, kind of successfully sort of internalize and kind of organically manage this sense of kind of time and its various kind of, U-turns and depredations and so on. And those are like the low road and the high road building, how it categorizes them. And the classic low road building is this building on the MIT campus called Building 20. He's not the first person to sort of celebrate this building. There had already been a kind of exhibition about it by the time he wrote about it, and it seems to come up repeatedly. It was a building built during the war very cheaply. It's a sort of big plan shaped a bit like the letter E, with sort of various wings. It's a sort of timber-framed 3-story building with sash windows. I think I've got a picture of it a bit closer in, and I think kind of weatherboarding, but it has this sort of myth attached to it because lots and lots of interesting things happened in it, and lots of people. I mean, MIT is obviously like a hugely prestigious private research university in one of the kind of intellectual like hotspots of the United States, the most powerful country in the world. And so lots of interesting people end up there, and lots of people by some sort of quirk also ended up in Building 20. So there are various kinds of, like, I don't really know any science, so I wasn't really able to understand the significance of a lot of the things that they were talking about. Like some things to do with radiation or something. Do you look into it?
I haven't looked into what.
No.
It was set up for radar research.
Yeah. They did all kinds of stuff there, and it's a very rough and ready building. They were able to kind of set up a sort of weird temporary like thing on the roof to do various bits of research, but it's also been a site of various certainly in the story of like various very successful bits of like interdisciplinary work, also of kind of mixing of people between various disciplines. Like Chomsky was also in this building for some reason. It's knocked down now. It seems like it was the windows didn't fit properly into the walls, and it didn't really have any kind of thermal control, but it was nevertheless like very appreciated, it seems, by its staff. It's a bit hard to understand, like his photos are very unclear because they're black and white and quite small. The ones which they have on Wikipedia are like, they don't look great. It's sort of hard.
So what does he say is good about it? Or I could say what he says is good about it, which is that he says it's good because you're allowed to do whatever you want with it.
Yeah.
It's a bit like, a bunch of students rent a house before it's scheduled to be demolished, and you can have parties where you sort of slowly render your home
you can cut a hole in the wall.
Inhabitable.
Yeah, it's a bit,
And it's kind of like that. It's like
you could do anything, and people sometimes wanted to do all kinds of things as for the work that they were doing.
Like what?
Like cut a hole in a wall or cut a hole in the floor, or one quite seldom wants to do that sort of thing, but putting
a hole in a wall is actually something you can do in most buildings most of the time.
Yeah, but we're kind of skipping to the end here, but like I think that one of the like many things which is sort of conflated or uncertain in the way Brand talks about things is like the difference between the actual building as like a constructed fact and the like regime of facilities management under which it's run. And the things which are stopping you from putting a hole in the wall are generally that it's a prestige piece of architecture that the facilities people don't want you to put a hole in the wall of.
No, often it's because someone owns that wall and it's not you. You're not allowed to knock it down.
Yeah,
because it's someone's wall.
I think that in this building, because they were always actually about to knock it down from, I don't know, like the 60s onwards. People could do whatever they wanted.
It does look, to be honest, a bit horrible.
It doesn't look great in the photos. I sort of struggle a little bit to quite get the vibe that he's talking about.
I think in a way he might be conflating the fact that it's like this building that all this fantastic work has been done in. I would imagine even though it's a Massachusetts Institute of Technology, I would imagine that like some of this stuff wasn't as prestigious when it was going on. Or maybe it was. There's a difficulty in this book in that 2/3 to 3/4 of the examples are set, obviously, in America and deal with American-built culture, and I just don't really. I find it much more difficult to call bullshit on it.
Yeah,
I suspect I might be finding the stuff more insightful if I knew that. Although I have a suspicion I might be finding some things less insightful.
Yeah,
if I knew more about that.
Yeah.
Because I do know about some of the examples, which are in the UK, which is the other. The examples in this book are from two countries.
Yeah.
The United States of America and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, although it's really just the south of England.
There's one building in Paris.
There's one building in Paris, yeah.
Which we'll get to. Yeah, I don't know. Apparently he either knew this building or knew lots of people who knew it and liked it. But anyway, that's what a low road building is. Or he
has a couple of other examples which I think are kind of possible to talk about. For example, he talks about his wife has a
Patty Phelan,
catalogue retailer business
selling equestrian supplies.
Yeah,
very successfully actually, by the sounds of things.
Certainly, he's very proud of her in any case, particularly how much money she makes.
Yeah,
it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. Yeah.
And it is in a industrial building, which is a sort of...
It's a classic like light industrial building with looks like a big space downstairs and a kind of office type space upstairs.
Yeah, I think originally it was probably like a double height kind of set of large industrial rooms, and then they put a floor in.
Yeah.
And he says that this kind of industrial warehouse space, which was converted from shipbuilding, is quite good to warehouse a catalogue retailer.
Yeah, I kind of like this little study. He would apparently go there every day or every week and take a photo at a prescribed time. Later in the book, he has even more photos of how everything kind of develops, everything moves around,
and he keeps going back to it because in the TV program in the late 90s, he's gone back, and there's been a succession of
other businesses there,
of other catalogue retailers in this space. There was a catalogue retailer which is the occupier when he produces the book, which is making.
The successor company was selling merchandise associated with the Doonesbury cartoon.
Yes, that's good. Yeah, I just couldn't remember if it was Doonesbury or like The Far Side or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then the next one is a children's toys, and he's like the guy from the children's toys place is like, no one could ever make blow bubbles in a more stuffy sort of building.
Okay. Yeah.
Which he does while he's blowing bubbles to demonstrate his bubble blowing apparatus.
Okay, cool.
Basically, what happens in this space is it's initially very stripped back, and his wife's company kind of installed a mezzanine level for admin, put in some more lights, I think.
Yeah, some more lights, some more electrics. Very like.
And I think they
seem to keep moving
a
stuff
subdivision, or they put in a sub. I think they put in a division, so there's 2 rooms downstairs as well, and then the next occupier takes out the partition but keeps the mezzanine level. And I think he's pointing out that in this building, the landlord doesn't mind if you put in a mezzanine level sort of thing.
Yeah.
The landlord hasn't objected to significant works being undertaken, although he doesn't really get into what the relationship with the landlord is in that. Like, are these works undertaken with permission? The implication is kind of that, like, the owner of the building doesn't mind, maybe doesn't even know if you're putting in a new floor or something. And that's the key thing with Low Road. In essence, he sort of just says these buildings are cheap, so people don't care what you do.
Yeah.
And that's good because it allows the occupier to adapt it to their needs.
Yeah.
Or another way is that the building is cheap and it has the most basic level of amenity.
Yeah.
And almost anything you do will increase that amenity, or at least be kind of neutral. And so you can do what you want.
Yeah.
And you've brought up a few other... He has 2 more examples from his own life.
Yeah. He has his actual like research library and place where the book was put together, which is a shipping container.
Yep. And the things that he's done to the shipping container is that he's built 2 sort of like desk height like benches running along the thing. The workers are thing. There's some storage. He's put in electric light, and he like paints the roof with reflective paint, which he says deals with the problem of it being too hot in the summer and too cold in the winter.
Which I don't. I mean, that bit I don't believe at all. But
that sounds complete.
will not. There is nothing you can paint it with which will stop
a
metal box from absorbing a huge amount of radiant heat on a sunny day.
Yeah. Also, it doesn't have any insulation. Anyway,
there is no magic paint that will do that. But it does look like a really beautiful little library. Like this is a very seductive image for me with him with all of everything pinned up. It's the luxury of having all of this space. And this space is, kind of an extension of his process, his mind. It's a way to sort of think through everything.
And he says, it works great. He can adapt it the way he wants. He doesn't need windows. Like with modest adaptation, it can be like very commodious.
Yeah, sure, I can believe all that.
How, for me, he doesn't really provide evidence for why it's better than a shed.
Don't know. No, I think a shed would be better probably. Or maybe you could have,
I think a shed would be better. It'd be made of wood. Its lifespan would easily be spec to this. It would have better environmental performance, and it would have windows.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. I guess a shipping container is a bit more rhetorical.
It is more rhetorical.
I mean,
one would think the examples he has chosen are gerrymandered.
Yeah, it is a bit more rhetorical. I mean, the shipping container building was like a very 90s meme, wasn't it?
I mean, it was a noughties meme, and it's a this decade meme, and it was a like teens meme, and I would say it's still a meme. They're still... I mean, the thing is now it's got to the point where they are corporate.
Yeah.
They are only done...
I suppose, yeah.
Like in the 90s...
There's the mall down there, isn't there?
Yeah.
In Shoreditch, yeah.
Yeah, there's the mall. There's another one in Brixton, which is slightly less corporate, but still... I mean, or at least... corporate.
There's one right there actually, which I'm just.
Yeah, there's another one there.
Yeah, it's just gone out of my head. Yeah,
which is a kind of like work unit.
There you go. There's influence.
It's a way of selling like they're very narrow plans.
Yeah, but it sort of sells. It's selling a particular image, isn't it? Of like get your hands dirty, rough and ready.
I don't actually know. I don't know if my when we were looking at a project. This was in the late noughties. Looking at a project. Actually using it was completely, it had like no tectonic function at all. Like we were examining ways in which you could use it. By the time you've like cut open them enough to make them useful, you basically have to kind of like structurally reinforce them. It was fine if if each unit was exactly the shipping container and you could stack them on top of each other and you had a gantry. Mm-hmm. You had a deck to kind of connect them, but if you wanted to use it for anything else, they weren't really... You can't really make them wider because they kind of function structurally like a monocoque. They need all the walls. Yeah. Those are his low-road examples. Now, in the TV series, he has other examples. So he has the example which was in one of the various illegally built or like pre-planning built, self-built holiday homes in the UK that are kind of built in fields in the like 30s, and are then kind of adapted from there as, I can't remember the examples. Houses that evolved out of sheds. Yeah. As a kind of opportunity for like working people to build houses in the 30s on agricultural land. There, obviously, people could... It was very quaint because people had all their own kind of ramshackle...
ways of doing stuff.
It was a kind of like English favela. Like, it was without plumbing and like very jerry built, but kind of also charming.
Yeah. I mean, he is sort of onto something about the attraction of certain kinds of buildings. In the middle of last year, we were in Toronto, and then on one of the islands off the coast there's a whole village of exactly what you're describing, these kind of holiday house / sort of dachas built by people on tiny little plots, which become like a complete expression of them. They're kind of, it's a sort of a space to explore an individual fantasy. I guess also for like inhabiting sort of classically like low road buildings. I mean, I've lived in a warehouse conversion, of which there have been lots in London at various times, where you get these like light industrial buildings and people put in bedrooms, and you have this kind of exciting.
But do you think that's actually a low road conversion in London?
It was quite low road, yeah. It was quite cheap. There's a thing where they are a lot of them are owned by landlords without that much money, often from particular minority communities who bought them in, say, the 60s or something, and are holding them but don't have that much working capital. And then, so they do like these kind of quite cheap conversions, get them into housing, make slightly more money, and then they will eventually sell. I mean, they do eventually sell out quite a long way down. So yeah, no, I would say they are kind of low road. Like not a lot of money was spent on those conversions actually, but that wasn't by the users. That was by the landlord.
That's sort of what I mean. Like if it's like a landlord just, I think a lot of these dynamics, and he does talk about this later in the book a bit, but a lot of these dynamics are really actually to do with ownership.
Yeah.
Rather than
architecture. Yeah.
Obviously, if you own, like, one of the reasons people here in London are kind of so obsessed with wanting to own a home is that you're not like a perpetual guest in a house that you can be turfed out of at any time. A dynamic which means that you don't even want to make it nice at all, let alone improve the building. And also you have no security. And that is a dynamic which obviously makes things less pleasant. But I don't think that's to do with building design. That's to do with tenure.
Yeah, it's to do with money. Which, I would say absolutely. I think that's a weakness of the diagnosis of what a low road building is principally a phenomenon of economics.
Yeah, it's where the occupier can do what they want, either because they're allowed to do what they want by the landlord, or because the landlord does not know, or because they own the building, or because they have those rights for some reason.
Yeah. And where it happens in a kind of interesting and exceptional way is generally because it's a kind of slow crisis of some kind, like the landlord doesn't care, the building is somewhat derelict.
Those holiday things in England were slated for demolition the whole time because they were kind of illegally developed. Yeah. They didn't meet. They were self-builds without like plumbing or sewerage.
If you take, for example, the place where one of Brand's homes is in Sausalito, which is in this houseboat community there, which is just north of San Francisco, and that was essentially a kind of illegal squat for a long time. A lot of people set up these houseboats, started living there, and was eventually kind of regularized.
But I would imagine, like, my experience in general of how these places are regularized is like you have a settled community, and then that community develop those rights. Yeah. But it is for them exclusively, as in a number of people have the right to continue having. They kind of develop a squatter's right, and then it's regularized. But it doesn't mean that it's kind of like the whole community has its own lifespan. Yeah. Where it starts as something illegal and becomes regularized, and then it's a sort of established community. It's not that you can't roll that out everywhere. That, again, is also to do with tenure. It's to do with the kind of accrued rights of a community who've built up this thing, and then they have managed politically to have it accepted or not accepted. Yeah. I mean, you can design cheap stuff. You can design... I mean, people now design warehouses for flexible occupation. Sure. But, like, the main problem that I've experienced in my life, and I'm sure many, and I don't believe this is unique to London, is that actually in the developed world, in most of the places people want to be, land value and development value is the key kind of...
Yeah, it's
more important than marginal cost of different types of building. And that's really what people are sort of shifting around. And between ownership, development rights...
Yeah.
Like, because some things are arbitraging ownership, but some things are also arbitraging development rights, right?
Yeah.
You're not allowed to develop on this bit of land. You've illegally developed on it as a group of people.
Yeah.
And then it's a negotiation about whether that's going to be regularized or demolished.
Yeah.
And these buildings can exist in the adaptations because the ownership is so uncertain that people don't mind you knocking through the wall because it's probably going to be knocked down. And that's slightly carnivalesque because normally we're like used to an atmosphere where everyone is not allowed to
knock the walls down,
have the insane like rave party and knock the walls down. And that's quite exciting, but that's a sort of transitory state.
Yeah.
I mean, we've gone into this chapter a lot, but I think...
Well, it's the kind of... This is like the vision of what well, it's one of the two visions of what buildings which are kind of have which are kind of which have like a conscious attitude,
which mature like fine wine.
Yeah. But I think
and I think those communities do mature like fine wine, because like if it starts as, you can imagine something like this, I'm going to make up a hypothetical thing, like on the outskirts of a town there is a like homeless community where they build shacks, and then over time they manage to avoid getting evicted, but the demographics change slightly and people get more like
raise families,
and then they put like things into it, and then eventually the council comes in and installs like sewage and water supplies, and then it becomes like a hippie commune of like lots of eccentric things as like different people change, and then it becomes like a tourist attraction, and that sort of but like that can also go off the road in other ways, or like early on it could have like a terrible fire and people could die and the council could demolish the whole thing. Am I being too critical? Does he have more of a point than I'm giving him?
No, I think that, I think low road... But the thing is, he's unarguably kind of correct. Like, this is a way that lots of buildings sort of thrive and become kind of intensely valued and part of sort of meaningful communities and, sort of support life in a very, like, this is a real description of how lots of lovely buildings come about. It's through this kind of evolution of something which no one was very interested in. But I guess the thing is, he's going to want to try and instrumentalise that into a critique of how you design buildings in the first place, which I think is not really suited to, because
these buildings are not...
It's not really a design question.
Are not like well designed. They're not buildings that are designed with that. You could make any building into a low road building, I think.
Yeah, and you could design... And lots of people do try to design like buildings which meet these kinds of, which have these sorts of qualities. And the reasons why it's difficult to do them are economic reasons. They're not because of a kind of cultural antipathy within architecture to this sort of idea.
I mean, don't you think that like a curtain wall, like skyscraper, or a commodity housing development in the right economic circumstances could also meet?
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
Like if everyone left Canary Wharf and it completely failed, and like all the glass panels started falling off and they were replaced with like plywood,
it'd be lovely. Yeah,
you could, and then you would have this like strange community in the now abandoned office towers.
Yeah.
Of like hippies, and then people would start like having hippie boats in the weird watery bits, and like
it could all
the
happen.
Like most extremely opposite thing could be like this. It's to do with economic and political circumstance.
Let's do the high road.
Sure. Here's like 5 examples.
Yeah, so he has the houses of 3 presidents: Washington, Madison, and Jefferson.
He has the
London Library,
the Boston Athenaeum, and Chatsworth.
Yes. One of the other most cited people is Deborah Cavendish, née Mitford, Duchess of Devonshire, which you would not necessarily have predicted. I mean, so one of his better examples is the London Library, which is a building I'm familiar with, which is a kind of private members' library set up in the 19th century, and which has gradually expanded from this kind of street front on St James Square to kind of take in a whole series of surrounding buildings. This is a plan from the Hayworth Tompkins scheme. where they did a sort of partial refurbishment, and
that was about 10 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, which is very nice, like very nice design, and it's a wonderful building, and a kind of a wonderful, like very atmospheric, very very sort of beautiful institution, a lovely place, and a very compelling example of how a building can kind of expand and be tailored to the growth of an institution over centuries.
Yeah, it's very clearly like messily accreted.
Yeah.
It's always been, it's in a prestigious and expensive part of London.
Yeah.
It's always been a prestigious cultural institution and has always had enough money.
Yeah.
And it sort of operates like a club.
Yeah.
And has always had the ability to sort of gently and slowly expand.
Yeah.
And never really had a crisis. But there are other examples of things, like I was thinking, comparing this to like the various prevails of the British Library, which used to be in an incredibly shabby setup in the middle of the British Museum.
Yeah.
Which was quite fun, but like...
Yeah. Well, not very well-maintained setup. Yeah. It's a bit sad. So it was a purpose-built, entirely cast iron building, including both stacks and reading room, and then they got rid of all the stacks but left the reading room, which is now kind of this sort of strange mausoleum for the previous scheme.
They should have moved that to the new one or something. And like anyway.
they should have moved the whole building somewhere else.
Yeah.
But they didn't do that.
So he has other examples. He's got the president's houses, which essentially follow this trajectory where they expand over the life of the president and then
sort of freeze.
Stop because they like go through a period of becoming museum, economically and then become museums.
Yeah.
What was his real lessons?
Well, I guess that this is just the other example of how buildings can change over time. So this is the much longer period. I mean, he does also talk about like Salisbury Cathedral, these sorts of classic examples of buildings which sort of go on and on and on and have endless revisions.
It's an interesting example that he uses Salisbury Cathedral, which is essentially, of all the cathedrals in this country, one that was built at one time.
Yeah.
And there are no additions since its construction is really interesting.
Yeah.
It was built in one go in like 40 years.
Yeah.
It's like lost some of the kind of original charm, I guess.
Yeah.
And the organ's been moved around, but like nothing has been done that significantly affects what it's like.
Yeah.
Other than moving some screens around and an organ.
I don't know. I'm not sure sometimes why he's chosen particular examples.
Which is interesting because it's almost the only cathedral like that in the country.
Yeah.
For the only medieval cathedral like that in the country.
Yeah.
And I don't really feel he ever really explains what he's trying to show with his examples.
Yeah.
He compares the attitudes of the American presidents and the way that they end up laying out their buildings. Washington is very pragmatic and has peasant wisdom of some sort or something like that, which leads him to an instinctive genius solution.
Jefferson is very uncompromising.
Is highfalutin and uncompromising.
Yeah.
Which leads to...
He doesn't mind when the ink freezes in the inkwell.
Yes.
Or when his wife immediately drops dead of quite possibly of cold. No, I'm not sure. They seem a bit different, those ones. I suppose, yes, one can kind of continuously build a house through one's whole life. It's quite a nice thing to do. It's quite, interesting thing to do. But it doesn't track any evolution except for just sort of having more money and wanting to have another go. I guess, we talked about a house like this when we talked about Strawberry Hill back in the mists of time, which is very much the same sort of thing.
But it's not like a house. It's funny that he doesn't have. He chooses examples where the building doesn't change. Chatsworth is just Chatsworth as it was built. And there have been additions, but they are not what you want to look at. Salisbury Cathedral is exactly the same.
Yeah.
He hasn't chosen a building, which has expanded through a whole series of different things at different times to produce some interesting, melange of historical styles.
No.
Which is an alternative sort of thing. He's chosen things that really exist in stasis.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of felt like the book would have been a lot better if it had just been these chapters, but they'd been expanded and had much better research.
Yeah.
Like the theory of flow, the low road building, the high road building, and then a kind of a much deeper explanation of the sort of different ways in which that can kind of work out. Because otherwise, I really
wanted something that was more expandable to the 99% of buildings that are not these, which is the normal road building. Because he has a third example, which is Starchitect buildings, which is completely
which is almost no buildings.
Yeah, which is almost no buildings. The high road is very few buildings, and the low road is very few buildings in expensive areas because it's to do with the thing not being valuable. Whereas, actually how, the not abandoned but not totally new buildings in mature cities change, or mature towns change, it would be something quite interesting. And I was kind of hoping it would get to that bit.
What's the middle road?
But it doesn't. There's nothing between kind of squatter.
We need a
style.
third way in.
Well, we don't need a third way.
Classic mid-90s style.
Yeah, it's not we need a third way. It's just that we live in the third way.
Yeah.
The third way is where you almost always live.
Yeah.
Sometimes you live in the low road.
They change a little bit, and they change on a kind of medium timescale. People build a slightly larger extension.
Or the office building is revamped and given a new facade.
Yeah.
Which dramatically improves its performance for the occupants.
Yeah. I mean, in the flat that I live in, which is behind me at this moment, there was a separate toilet and bathroom, and we knocked them together to make a combined toilet bathroom. I'm not sure that's really low road, though.
That's not low road.
I don't know. I mean,
you carefully did it to preserve and enhance value.
Yeah. It depends how you kind of construe low road. In one sense, actually, this building is quite well designed to facilitate change over time, because the structure is the box around the outside, and the internal walls.
What do you mean, like houses and flats?
Like normal houses and flats, yeah. And the internal walls are predominantly non-structural. It depends how you sort of set what the boundaries of the low road are, but it could either be almost everything, which is what I initially thought, or kind of just islands created by particular economic circumstances.
Yeah. It seems to be almost things that exist kind of between when you've got a difference between what it should be worth and what it is worth because of something.
Yeah. It becomes really weird at this point because his principal source for the high road building is Deborah, Duchess of Devonshire, who he quotes at length. In these very long verbatim quotes, rambling about all kinds of stuff.
And they have no insight at all.
Yeah, she doesn't sound. There was a whole bit where she's quoted.
It just feels like, I found this posho.
Yeah.
The old aristocratic charm and her very posh accent made me very excited, and I wanted to speak to her for hours and hours. How frightfully exotic these old world aristocrats are.
Yeah.
What an interesting life she has lived as a rich person in a big house.
Her photo in the book is very bizarre.
I have no other explanation for why he found it interesting.
Yeah. She goes on and on for ages and ages about how they're always having to fix different bits. Like the classic.
Oh yes, the council is so boring. And
the
we're always
classic
having to fix
poor
things.
me aristocrat thing of the roof. Don't you know the roof is terribly expensive to maintain? Yeah, no, she appears a bit later in the whole bit of where she's sounding off about the council stopping them from doing some kind of slum development in their outbuildings.
Even if you don't have it's not that the things she's saying are unreasonable. It's just that they're irrelevant.
But they're pretty banal, and it's also just so weird.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. So that's that. And but he does make clear what he doesn't like. Yeah. Which is magazine architecture.
Yeah. So Building 20 in MIT is contrasted with this other building, the Wiesner building, in which was an office building built by I.M. Pei, for MIT, initially without a clear program, but which then was used to house the MIT Media Lab, which is an institution that Brand was very connected with, digital media kind of research organisation, very influential.
Yeah, lots of things were being called media labs a bit after this.
Yeah. I mean,
basically, the things that were being called media labs after this generally were libraries.
Oh, yes. He really hates this building.
I mean, it doesn't look great.
It doesn't look great. He talks about how it really, really doesn't work for its occupants. He talks about how it isolates them from each other through its like big open. It has these big atria which you don't really look into from the offices. The offices are kind of separated by this like smoked glass or by walls, and it's got multiple different entrances. It's all feels very anonymous and seems to prevent people from having real sort of social contact.
It's weird that the problem that he suggests with this building is that the architects have spent too much effort trying to make it look good.
Yeah, it looks extremely anonymous. It looks, I mean, like slightly posher version of like what office buildings all looked like in Chinese cities in about 1980, which is like tiles on the outside. It's like a slightly higher spec kind of tile rather than the like little white bathroom tiles, which is what they mostly had.
I mean, I'm not sure he's wrong that it's a bad building. I haven't been there, so it's hard to tell sometimes. Like, couldn't you just call it bad design?
It does look like a bad piece of design, but for him, it's a sign of something bigger, which is architects don't care about their users.
There's a big section where he literally goes like, I don't want to be another one of these architecture bashers, and then there is 10 pages.
Yeah, I think one of the real problems is that at this point, kind of the voice of Chris Alexander takes over. And a lot of what he has to say is essentially like paraphrasing Christopher Alexander's sort of slightly strange sort of psychodrama about the architectural profession and its rejection of him.
In the TV series, Chris Alexander keeps talking about my profession, even though he's not an architect. And he has Chris Alexander, architect, written underneath him. And he's not an architect.
He can call himself an architect, so I don't care.
That's fine. But, like, in my opinion, there can be two ways you can be an architect. You can be qualified as an architect, or you can be good at designing buildings. And he doesn't meet either of those.
Okay, shots fired. Yeah. In the TV series, he also goes into various other things which are wrong with this building, which... Oh, no, I'll just finish. So his theory of what's wrong with architecture is that architects don't care... Architects want their buildings to just stay the same forever. They don't care about the life of the building after it's built. And they're really interested only in this kind of like outer image of the building as it appears in a magazine. This kind of projection of it into media and into very image-focused discourse of the profession and as a form of advertising.
The strange thing is, like, that's a very rehearsed argument.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like, you know, these people care about is like flashy things. Is that he also then says some things that are genuinely problematic with architecture, which is that architects have very limited control of projects. They're driven by clients who often want to make money or do something. Architectural production is kind of like highly specialized and outsourced. Stuff has to be kind of bought in. He sort of says all that but then goes, but the real reason it's bad is because architects only want to make things that look good in pictures, and architecture schools make them like that.
They teach them, yeah. It comes down to the degeneracy of architecture schools, which really, like, for me, that's the voice of Chris Alexander coming through. It's like, it's a cultural problem. There's something, it's entirely sustained by the, like, degeneracy and wickedness of architects themselves. It's not something structural or something which exists in a kind of broader, like, economic context.
It's really weird because
it could go away if architects themselves were to become more virtuous and to acquire deeper insight.
He kind of says various other things that are like making it kind of difficult to do nice buildings.
Not really what he
and then he says, no, it's not that.
It's not that.
It's not that. That's not the reason. The real reason is this. They're wicked.
Yeah. So we should say the building itself doesn't look great. It's pretty banal looking, and it doesn't look very nice on the inside either.
Yeah, I mean, so he's like,
and I think that his sort of
his
statement,
criticism is that architects are obsessed about making buildings look good in photographs.
Yeah. This one doesn't look.
If
great
you
in
want
photos,
to
does it?
judge,
Yeah.
just look at photographs of this building and tell me if you think this is a building which has been ruthlessly optimized to look good in photographs.
Yeah, it doesn't strike me that way. Maybe the interior. Maybe there was an idea there. To me, this one feels quite phoned in by old IM Pei. In the TV show, he goes on a bit more about the things which were wrong about this building, which included that one of the lifts went on fire, and also that the air conditioning didn't work, and then at one point the entire building was filled with the disgusting smell of something dead. But which, worth saying, those are all engineers' responsibilities. And not the fault of the architect.
Architects don't design lifts.
Yeah, or air handling.
Yes, no.
At all.
Have you ever, in your working life, had a really satisfactory, happy... I've met cultured and interesting
M&E
engineers.
Have you ever heard anyone say we had a wonderful M&E engineer?
yeah. The experience was such a dream. They didn't want to fill
They were very good.
boxes.
I would really recommend working with them. No.
I've forgotten his name, in spite of the fact that I've met
Max
him.
Fordham.
Yeah, like a lot of people were recommending Max when he was alive.
And
he was a very personable and cultured personality.
Good. They are said to be good and very expensive.
Yes.
Yes, they are good.
Sometimes it pays for quality. So, I have heard of it. I've just never experienced it in my actual life.
Yeah.
Do you know something interesting
with
that picture?
Yeah.
You seem to be able to open the windows.
It does look like it, doesn't it? Which he says is impossible. But maybe it's a recent thing. Maybe they put new windows in.
Yeah.
Marvin Minsky, one of the founders of artificial intelligence, was gazing across the deserted Media Lab atrium with me Monday. The problem with architects, he rasped, is that they think they're artists and they're not very competent. And that is broadly the critique.
Architects can be artists. They don't have to think it. It can be true.
Yeah.
And whether they're good or not depends on whether they are good or not architects.
Yeah. This building, it doesn't look great. I think it's...
Yeah, but you can't just have an argument where you choose all the examples as ridiculous straw men.
Yeah. But the thing is, almost no buildings are like this.
Yeah.
This is a building by what was, at the time it was commissioned, the most famous and successful architect in the world. And the MIT campus is basically a collection of buildings like that. When you are an enormously... this is a private research university in Massachusetts, which has more money than quite a lot of nation states. And the way that they like to do things is that they like to have all of their buildings by incredibly famous architects. That's the way that they commission them. And they want them to be these kind of showpieces.
But this is not one that will crop up normally in an architecture.
No,
lecture.
This is
like the Alto one, for example, might, although actually it's not a particularly good example of an Alto building.
Yeah, it looks okay.
It's just the one in America.
Yeah, they got a Geary one, they got a Stephen Hall one. They have them by everyone.
Yeah.
And all of these kind of this type of university in America, that's what they do. They commission. He's right that they are like pieces of art because they are prestige commissions.
Except this one is just it's bad.
This one, it's not great. This one, no, I'm not defending it, but it's a prestige commission. They want the most famous people to do an example of their style.
This is nearer to a certain one at our dear alma mater, I would say, in terms of quality.
Yeah. The reason why the buildings at MIT end up being like this is because of the culture of the institution MIT. It's not because of the ideology of architects as a whole.
Yeah.
You could get someone who would be very happy to build another Building 20 style cheap and cheerful one. That would not be hard. You could get any, but...
I would say he has two... There's two things. There's one that's he sort of implies that clients don't choose what the buildings are going to be like, which they do. It's like any of these other things. You're paying them to do a job and you choose who they are and then you choose what they're going to do.
There is a market and there is a surplus of architects. I would say quite a big one. You can get any kind you want.
Yeah, exactly. You choose... and the other thing he has an obsession, which has already cropped up this, but I will continue through the book with, everything is, architects make things, buildings are perpetually leaking.
Yeah.
And services are rubbish. And what happened after the lift caught fire? Do you think it kept catching fire forever, Luke?
No, I don't think so.
Do you think someone from Otis came down and fixed it?
Yeah, probably. Do you think they got... were they on Otis, or do you think they were on
Could
some...
be, Tiss and Croops.
Was it a prestige... what's the most expensive kind of lift? What's the...
I don't know. Like,
in a way, I think part of the disappointment of this is, like, Stewart Brand is a person who's very interested in technology, who, like, has thought a lot about technology, but who doesn't really seem to have ever really considered specifically what type of technological object a building is. And
this is like what you have to perpetually calm clients down on, which is... And it feels to me like if you're working with some sort of piece of technology, like a building or a bit of software or something, and it doesn't work and you don't understand why, you panic. People panic. It's natural. So, like, when something goes a bit wrong on a building site and there's, like, water on the floor, if the clients are there, they get very concerned.
Yeah.
And you might know what you've got to do is turn off the tap, and then they'll, like, just put, like, a...
Yeah.
They'll fix that joint or whatever, and it will be the work of 10 minutes. But they will get very alarmed, and you have to be very, like, charismatically calm.
Yeah.
One of my old bosses was just so good at this. Like, it wouldn't, like, the thing could be on fire, and people would just come out, like, glowing. Like, the progress is so good. I love the flames.
So
really
warm,
illuminated.
so warm in there.
Really illuminated the building to fantastic effect. And actually, the flooding on the floor was such a good combination with the. But there is a truth that, like, if you don't understand what's wrong and something is manifesting wrong, you kind of people panic. And I would have hoped that you could use the technology, because it's like that when you're developing like a device or a bit of software all the time. Like,
but
things crash for like stupid reasons. It's not really to do with anything important, and it completely stops it working all the time.
Yeah.
And then you just find out what's wrong with it and you fix it. And the building's just like that. The lift's caught fire. What we shall do is repair the lift, diagnose the problem, and resolve it. The roof is leaking.
Yeah.
Probably there's a problem.
Yeah.
Perhaps someone should go up there and sort it out.
Yeah.
And if you've got people on site, often that can be done in an afternoon.
Yeah. But they also inevitably have problems.
Yeah.
Because they are extremely complicated and generally unique.
Yeah.
So that's, just the way they are.
There's loads of things that have come together.
Yeah.
And it's been the work of many hands. How many components go into buildings? Like a big building?
Yeah.
A million?
Yeah.
You might have 1 million things in the building.
Yes, and it will...
As many as a space shuttle, but it's done for...
It's done as a one-off, much cheaper, by much less expert people. Weirdly, his like principal architectural target in the book...
He's got real beef with one... Yeah, he loves Brian Eno,
hates
and the Duchess of Devonshire, and hates Richard Rogers, that meretricious architect.
Yeah. Weirdly, he has a funny bit in the book where he's like, the 3 high-tech architects in the UK, there was Stirling, Foster and Rogers. Foster's okay. Stirling, pretty bad. Rogers, worst of all.
It's weird because Stirling's not really a high-tech architect.
Not really, no.
He does lots of things. And that is like a very strange take.
Yeah. Very much like one of architecture's nice guys.
It's weird because he was like.
Yeah, I don't know where the animus comes from. But I
met Rogers when I was a child several times, and he was like an extremely personable person.
Yeah.
As well as his buildings being, as a place to be employed, it has a reputation for being, like, still somewhat difficult, and it's on potentially rather hard times now. But like being the nicest employer of the sort of big architect offices in London, and the buildings being like the most humane.
Yeah. It's very strange. Yeah, so he has a whole bit about how the Pompidou Centre is like a complete failure.
In some ways the Pompidou Centre isn't great, but for absolutely not the reasons.
Yeah, so
there's one thing about the Pompidou Centre which is great, which is the thing he identifies as rubbish.
Yeah. Pompidou Centre is considered a landmark.
Where do you think that considered deserves to be in? That's like this so-called building.
Yeah. Where the Eiffel Tower exposed its structure in an elegant and monumental way, Pompidou Centre tries to do the same with its services. But iron structure can withstand the elements much better than brightly coloured ducts and pipes. The Eiffel Tower's lasting message to architecture is, exposed structure can be gorgeous. Pompidou's lasting message is, never expose services. And this is all because I guess he'd read some article that said that they were having maintenance issues.
They have had problems with this building.
Yeah.
But they're not really... I'm sure they do require maintenance. But that's not really been...
No. I would say this is a very successful building.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's. I wouldn't say it's a very successful building, but I would say the facade design is a very successful facade design.
Yeah, to the extent that there's an issue with the Pompidou, it's actually that it is too flexible. So the concept, I mean, if you don't know the essential concept of it, it was designed to have these enormous uninterrupted spaces for the display of exhibitions, and so they're these huge spaces with these big steel roof trusses, and then all the services and all the circulation are on the outside, and you could.
There's one thing I think they should have done actually that I think would have made it cool. Yeah. The floor decks should be like giant lifts, so you can move all the floors up and down, and then it would be weird enough that you could have you could just turn the whole thing into a massive cavernous thing, or have one of them going up and down all the time.
You can squish all the people at a certain point.
Yes, everyone down. Like bugs.
Yeah.
I think that would have done it.
That would have been nice. Yeah. Yeah.
And actually, in the building, it would almost be technologically possible because they're all on.
Yeah. It's weird that he has such a bee in his bonnet about this. It's
another building that's really shit.
Yeah.
Another terrible. What do you think the worst building in London is?
Oh, the Lloyd's of London.
Is it the beloved Lloyd's building?
The beloved Lloyd's building, also by Rogers. Yeah, which apparently is terrible and
awful.
Hated by its users and all this kind of stuff. Completely untrue. I mean, this is what I find weird, and it's weird, and it shows a certain superficiality of engagement. Is that actually the Pompidou Centre is a really serious attempt to engage with this problem of what happens to buildings after they're built. The whole novelty of their solution, the reason why they're selected, and the reason why it is a kind of landmark in architectural history is that it's an extremely creative response to the problem of, how do we create really flexible space for exhibitions. And
the entire interior is deployable, except for the key failure of not having the floor plates as lifts.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, at the end of the day, the issue with it is, I mean, I think actually they
don't have any good artwork to put inside it.
Well, I mean, they have lots of temporary exhibitions and things, but it's the issue is actually a lot of the time when you display stuff, you don't need a completely flexible space. You just need a somewhat flexible space, and they, I think, slightly exceeded the necessary brief for a place to display stuff, because there's nothing there's never anything to display which is actually 30 by 60 meters or whatever.
In fact, it is occupying the sort of place of it exists in a space, I would say, between the Tate Modern and the Bilbao Guggenheim, which were both rather later.
Yeah.
Where the Bilbao Guggenheim is entirely a work of sculpture and makes no pretense of being designed to do anything.
Yeah.
I mean, it has interior space which can be used, but so what? And there is work there. And the Tate Modern is okay, we've got this big, impressive, cool building already.
Let's get some
power
art
station.
In.
Yeah. Let's do. And they did a very good job, but it's let's use what's cool about it already to do something, and display art. Whereas this is kind of let's build a cool building optimized to display art, but it has a lot of charisma, but the charisma isn't directed towards the art.
No, it's sort of towards the outside. Yeah.
But anyway,
he
doesn't talk about any of that. He has no interest in any of that. What he is interested in is that this person has had the temerity.
Yeah, to do his idea in a way that
and to have the pipes on the outside.
In the way that he doesn't like.
And it is awful.
Yeah. Terrible. Okay, what else does he talk about? Yeah, he has various other chapters. I mean, there's a bit about preservation. Is that what comes next? There's real estate.
Yes, so he has a criticism.
This is basically pure Jane Jacobs.
Yeah.
This is...
Yeah. And it has lots of quotes.
He's read Jane Jacobs. You could essentially listen to our discussion of Jane Jacobs and get the whole idea.
I mean, so many people have said our discussion of Jane Jacobs is wrong. I'm not questioning myself, but I'm not...
It's basically one of her observations is that continuity in neighbourhoods is interrupted when money flows in very fast and big development happens very rapidly. What she's interested in is this sort of Goldilocks zone of just enough gentrification at just the right sort of pace. and
I can kind of remember that.
Yeah, and that's basically his idea as well, which is at that kind of pace, buildings tend to remain in place somewhat, be infilled a bit, and be adapted a bit, and you get a kind of continuing life.
The point of what was the point he was making with churches? Like, I understand the example is there's been a church on a site. It starts as a Adobe Catholic church. It's revamped slightly mock Gothic, and then it's rebuilt in brick as a more Gothic-y one, and then it's rebuilt as a Santa Fe style, whitewashed Gothic one. And he says this happens because the church thinks the real estate is important.
Yeah, it's kind of
they've
continuously
got a prestigious site.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think that there's really anything in this chapter beyond the kind
of Leon Krier.
He's a big fan of Leon Krier, and
and it says you should he's into getting rich slowly. That's what his that's his.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
You know who gets rich slowly?
Property owners. Wait,
no, the beloved genius.
The beloved genius, who?
The Duchess of Devonshire.
Oh, Deborah.
Aristocratic landowners.
Deborah, yes.
It's the sort of slow wealth movement.
Right, and then we have preservation, which is a very weird chapter, which is... I've been saying that about every chapter. Like all of these, it's got bits of kind of interesting stuff, but the way in which it's synthesized is not coherent. So he talks a little bit about the preservation movement.
I mean, it might be that we're in a strange place because he thinks that the UK is doing it really well. So maybe we're just, because we're the beneficiaries of that, we don't really understand what's bad. And that might be true, I don't know.
So he's basically speaking in favour of preservation, and he sort of talks a little bit about the preservation movement, which is kind of from the 60s onwards in the United States, as here to some extent, in opposition to urban redevelopment. I mean, interestingly, he has a real go at Robert Venturi, who he hates. But Venturi was actually a big...
Who's a preservationist?
Was a big preservationist, and he and...
he just thinks you should also preserve some new things as well.
Yeah. Denise Scott Brown and he were involved in a lot of stuff in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. Yeah, we got preservation, but what does preservation mean? It kind of means all sorts of things. There is, I guess that what he's interested in proving with it is that people's fondness for old buildings shows the value of allowing buildings to exist through time, and the attachment that people build up with old buildings over time is something which kind of is sort of meaningful and needs to be taken greater account of. And I think that is. And
the great success of this is the conversion of an early 19th century house into a McDonald's.
Yeah, the conversion of an 18th century vernacular house into McDonald's. Yeah.
Yeah, it's into the 12,000th McDonald's.
Yes, just off Jericho Turnpike on Long Island. You can sort of tell where he's been on his holidays, can't you? All of this is...
I mean, which is an interesting example because it's not one that, I would have...
It's a perfectly nice conversion. I think that McDonald's seem to be taking good care of this building, and all power to them.
Yeah. There's a lot in this which is... You've got different approaches. And previously, I'm sure we've talked about different approaches to architectural theory where you can have prescriptive. If you do it like this, you'll end up with an understanding of my genius plan.
Yeah.
So, Le Corbusier did quite a lot of that.
Yeah.
Or descriptive, this is how buildings or cities are how they are, or my ones. This is why my ones are like they are.
Yeah.
And here I would just say, really, it's I'm just going to make a series of observations.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd forgotten how long this chapter was, actually.
And it's kind of like you said, the whole Earth catalogue is a cut and paste job where he's just got things, cut them out,
and
got them, lithocopied them, and then it goes out to the presses. And this feels a bit like that. It's he's just kind of written down his ideas.
I mean, there's a more germane example which he talks about the conversion of the little tugboat that they live in, or one of the places they live in. But he's making the kind of straightforward point that you create much more interesting spaces when you have a bit of a strange space to start with.
He's actually even architects can be very self-praising when they want to be, but he has a line here which says the moment of supreme genius in this design.
What turned out to be the houseboat's most fiendishly clever feature, a little
by
opening.
me.
that was easily reached from the kitchen below.
And what is the most fiendishly clever thing that he's come up with? Is it a weird little cat flap?
There's a special little cat flap between the low-down kitchen and this sort of bed platform upstairs where you can pass things up and down.
Yep, at floor level.
Well, that's kind of sweet. I mean, I'm rather enjoy all this sort of stuff. Yeah, the stuff that I don't really get. So he has this thing which is Death of a Cottage, which I think is cribbed from a book.
This whole thing, I think, is literally taken the whole thing.
Yeah, it's taken from a from I think a kind of a piece of guidance which has then been fed into English planning in some way, which is essentially saying that you shouldn't be allowed to extend a house. This is literally like a feature of English planning guidance now. You shouldn't be allowed to extend a house by more than half its original area.
Yeah.
And there's sort of series of little drawings which sort of explain why this is so.
You know someone who did?
Who?
Could that be Washington?
Oh yes,
Jefferson,
Madison,
and Madison.
Yeah.
Did they do exactly this?
Yeah, but they were great men. The rules are different for them.
What about the Sun King?
Yes.
Did he extend by more than 50% of the ground area?
I think he did, but he was the state, so I think that planning guidance doesn't apply to him.
Yeah.
This is like the real downside of the kind of omnium gatherum scrapbook approach, is like this is a pure piece of like conservative heritage brain sort of planning paranoia. Like, we've got to stop people extending too much because the nice cottages won't look nice anymore. And, he has another bit, he starts quoting Leon Creer on the preservation of the countryside and that kind of thing at a certain point. And it's like, make your mind up, because if what you love is like garages in Palo Alto, and if what you think is the kind of like engine of human flourishing is the ability to like muck around in big, cheap, ex-urban spaces, then you can't have like a super restrictive planning policy. That's not the way things work.
This diagram is literally the opposite of what it, which is that you shouldn't be able to take old buildings and extend them.
Yeah, it's so incoherent. It just doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, I think that again, that the TV show, he kind of reins stuff in a bit, but like
you could have that, the like this thing is good, this thing is bad meme.
Yeah,
it's like this thing is bad.
Yeah,
and then the same thing is good.
Yeah, that is good.
A succession of people have adapted it.
Yeah, this stupid little cottage, which no one could live in any kind of dignity, is turned into a nice big house with a garage.
I grew up partly in a village, and the little house lived in a granny opposite. Used to be 6 houses, and there are people still alive who lived in that.
Yeah.
And they had one tap between them.
Oh my God.
And one of the houses had 13 people living in it, and it was probably, I don't know, the whole house, it was probably like 15 square meters downstairs, 15 square meters upstairs. It had 13 people living in it, and it was a little cute cottage like that, living in this is like in the 50s, in absolute poverty.
Yeah.
And the idea that you shouldn't be able to adjust that is ridiculous.
Yeah. No, it's madness. It's like, I feel like this book is really onto something very interesting, but the way that it engages with everything is so scatterbrained and superficial that it's like deeply aggravating.
It feels so arrogant.
Yeah.
He hasn't done his homework.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is irritating, because addressing the topic is really interesting and potentially very important. And I've never felt that someone has given me like really good general insights for this. And I think that's partly because it's a difficult subject. But I don't think he's really taken on any sort of systematic approach. He has taken on an approach of things I like, which are often things he has done, or things that people he likes have done, or nice places he's visited, like a McDonald's or the London Library or the Boston Athenaeum, or country houses in America and England. They're good. And then the like worst things I can find are bad.
Yeah.
Instead of like, okay, I'm going to look at this chunk of the city over time. I know he's got all these examples, but he never really describes what's going on in them.
Yeah.
He just says this shop has changed from being this shop to this shop to this shop. Which sort of says a lot.
Yeah. And there's various other bits. He has a whole like bit on the difference between like scrape and anti-scrape in the 19th century.
He's talked about them. And that's fine. That's true. Like, this is the like, if we need to explain it, it's the difference between the way he talks about it is also superficial.
Yeah,
but the difference is on one side you've got the pestilential renovators, like
restoring things to their original state.
Or they're they're scarecrow's original state, or you can kind of leave them.
Yeah.
And the real answer is you have to make an artistic decision.
Yeah.
And sometimes getting rid of loads of stuff is the correct artistic decision. Yeah. Sometimes being radical can be very good.
So here's the turn to maintenance, which is...
this chapter is so bizarre.
Maintenance, I would say, is like where... There's a bit on vernacular, which I think we might skip entirely. It's basically Christopher Alexander again.
It's not particularly... The maintenance one's fun to talk about because he has some strange... Did you notice that he says you can't... Slate's okay to use, but if you leave it in the sun, it dissolves.
Yeah. I don't know. So maintenance is where the book becomes really wacky. Stewart Brand has distinct opinions on. I think he fancies himself a bit of a handyman, and he has distinct opinions on what's legitimate to build buildings out of. His general attitude to maintenance, oddly, he kind of talks about the romance of maintenance, and it seems, and he actually at the moment I think is writing a book about maintenance, but. In this book, he is generally opposed to the existence of maintenance and views it as a kind of...
Other times he thinks people are not doing enough of it.
Yeah.
He has various diagrams which really feel like something out of a presentation where you're talking about how you're going to maximize profits with a graph, which is just a curve.
Oh, right.
Going up. He has a couple of curve going up, line go up graphs.
Yeah. But a lot of the aim is basically to avoid maintenance.
Yeah,
in the design of buildings.
And he makes points, it's good that if you can see if something's going wrong. So it's bad to clad a building in aluminium panels, but it's good to clad it in woods because when the wood rots and falls off, you can see it. If you tile in slate, the sun will make the slate dissolve.
Yeah.
Rot it. He says UV rots slate.
You also...
So it's much better to have all your roofs made of stainless steel.
Yes. But you also shouldn't... Well, you shouldn't use wood a lot of the time. I mean, I started with this one because it's so weird. The maintenance-free cottage, it's it's a slightly nondescript kind of house in the home counties somewhere.
After he had coated the two most weatherly walls with a clear coat silicon seal and had one whole course of bricks near the ground damp-proofed by injecting silicone, the window frames are now only need a coat of paint every 3 years, and that's about it for exterior work.
So this is sort of a brick house, looking like of the interwar period.
Is that a thing, by the way? Applying a clear silicone seal to a brick building?
It doesn't sound like a good idea to me at all.
Yeah, is it going to have damp problems?
Yeah.
Building up behind the...
Because the building is... that won't be a cavity wall, will it?
Well, I can have a look, but I'd be very surprised if it is. No, it's definitely not.
So it's a solid brick building. It is going to produce a lot of moisture on the inside. Some of that is going to go into the bricks, and it's then not going to be able to go out to the outside. So I would say... That sounds to me like that would make the building fall down, actually, over time.
Also, saying that all you have to do to the windows of a building is paint them every 3 years is not what I would describe as low maintenance. All you have to do is maintain the roof and paint the windows every 3 years. Doesn't seem like a really convincing case for a no-maintenance house. That's just what you have to do to everything.
I mean, some of it makes sense. There's a bit in praise of pitched roofs, which I think are generally somewhat simpler to detail.
Yeah. Normally we don't... You know why people in houses at least don't do flat roofs, of pitched roofs? It's because you're not allowed to get that high. Yeah. You can fit in more with a flat one because of planning restrictions.
Yeah. That's why people have flat roofs. He says, both here and in the TV show, that all flat roofs leak.
Which is definitely not true, actually. It's quite straightforward to detail one... I mean, you have to maintain a pitched roof and you have to maintain a flat roof.
Yeah.
You can do a flat roof that will be fine for 50 years, no problem.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure whether you could do that in the 90s. Could you do those fiberglass ones in the...
I think they were just coming... They were coming out in the... Both the fiberglass and the EDPM rubber ones were coming out. I mean, bituminous felt ones are not great. I mean, if you wanted to, you could have done it in metal. But also tile roofs you have to redo every 50 years.
Yeah.
On the outside, really. I mean, often less than that.
Yeah.
And they require maintenance. And you can only see where they're leaking if you haven't had an attic conversion.
Yeah. Or if you haven't got any insulation on the roof.
Yeah. So, the kind of ideal case is that you've got a ceiling insulated and then an uninsulated attic space.
Yeah. Yeah, so he makes the argument that in a pitched roof you can see where the water's coming in, which you can, but only if the roof cavity is unheated, which is very unusual in a modern house because you would normally have the insulation between the roof joists.
Oh, he loves that college. He actually puts on... Did you like the accent he puts on? He puts on a yokel accent when he talks about the Foresters.
This is so cringy that...
it's because there's something he really likes, and it is poshos.
Yeah, so this is an apocryphal story about New College Great Hall, which had its beams replaced in the mid-19th century. And it's a story which is told by Gregory Bateson in a lecture, which is also on YouTube, you can see. And Bateson was an Englishman, but I think he was doing this to an audience of Americans, and I think he was kind of...
Did he think they were gullible?
He knew that they would like it, I think. And the story is like that... The big oak beams were rebuilt with oak from the New College lands, and the story was that those oaks had been specially planted in the Middle Ages and had been kind of preserved by generations of clever woodsmen.
Cunning, folksy, who, yes, the tradition handed down from father to son.
Maybe we should...
amongst the forelock-tugging yokels.
Oh, yeah. Well, we could drop a bit of the audio in.
My friend Gregory Bateson used to tell the story of the oak beams of New College, Oxford. This is how it went. New College was founded in the late 14th century. It had, like other colleges at Oxford, a great dining hall with oak beams across the top. A century ago, some busy entomologist poked at the beams and discovered that they were full of beetles. This was reported to the college council, who met in some dismay because where would they find beams of that caliber nowadays? One of the junior fellows stuck his neck out and suggested there might be some oak on the college lands. So they called in the college forester, who of course had not been near the college for years, and asked him about oak. And he pulled his forelock and said, "Well, sirs, we was wondering when you'd be asking." On further inquiry, it was discovered that when the college was founded, a grove of oaks had been planted to replace the beams in the college hall when they became beetly, because oak beams always become beetly in the end. This plan had been passed down from one forester to the next for 500 years. You don't cut them oaks, them's for the college hall. A nice story. That's the way to run a culture.
In both versions is just incredibly cringy. And this kind of...
And also,
I mean, as well
specious.
As self-evidently, made up. Just nonsensical. I mean, the thing with Oxford colleges is they have loads of land. And if you have loads of prime farmland in certain bits of England, they're full of oaks. They're all over the place.
Yeah, I mean,
like the idea that you wouldn't have...
It is unusual to get... It is quite hard to get ones which have got very tall, straight oaks because you have to grow them in a forest rather than singly. Also, they would have had to have had the oaks grow for 500 years, which is way too long.
Yeah.
It should be like 200 years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, in the story. Yeah, no, the hall has lasted much too long, though you don't want your oaks to be that long. Because they'd all be rotten in the middle. Yeah. That's not the length of time that you need for prime. No. I mean, and he does a little wink and says, "Oh, that's the way to build a culture," or whatever.
Yeah.
Like,
I know. Civilization thrives when old men plant trees they will never sit under.
I know. Pablum.
Tell us more about the time you met the Duchess of Devonshire. Please tell us. Oh, please.
Yeah. How much more of this can we do?
We could talk about his consultancy.
There's more of the same. Yeah, so the book takes like an interesting turn, like nearly at the end, with what he calls the scenario buffered building, which is...
What is his big solution, Luke?
It is scenario planning, which coincidentally he has a business in in providing.
He's selling this, yeah.
Or at least did at the time, which is called... It has the funniest name. It's called like... global business solutions, or like global international business solutions. And it's essentially scenario planning. It's kind of like the idea is when you design the building, you should think about not only the future that you're planning for, but can you also roadmap a bunch of other things that could happen and have like the building somehow be equipped for those. You could indeed do this, and I think lots of buildings already are sort of equipped for different possibilities in a very banal way. Lots of houses, not unlike the one that's immediately behind us, are built so that it's relatively straightforward to move around the walls which enclose the rooms.
Yeah, and I can tell you another way, that the most common developer way in which you plan for the future, you plan to sell the building.
Yeah.
As soon as possible.
Well,
and that rather causes the problem. The problem is not caused by people think we are going to own this building for 100 years.
Yeah.
How can we best adapt to the future things that will come up in 100 years?
Yeah.
No.
You sell out.
You sell out, or you are planning to redevelop it after a certain period of time, or you really need to think about, if you're a capitalist enterprise, you need to think about a reasonable time which you can return capital. Yeah. That's got to be your horizon. People are investing over this amount of time, we are going to depreciate future earnings.
Yeah,
I don't think people are completely way off in their approaches. It's just that the incentives are different.
Well, he sort of has the idea that the all the glass-walled skyscrapers ran into trouble because of the oil shock and the increased cost of energy in the late 70s.
But all the skyscrapers now are built like that.
They're still built like that, yeah, so that can't have been completely true. But he kind of thinks, well, maybe when people were designing them, they should have thought through what are some things that could happen. Maybe energy will get more expensive.
Oh.
And then...
I wonder what you do then. Do you think you change the plant?
Do
you think you get an M&E engineer in?
Yeah, maybe. Then your problems are just beginning.
But maybe everyone's doing that at the same time. Maybe you should do that a bit, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think people do, to some extent, do this. And
you should be thinking, I think it's a reasonable thing. I just think that, I don't think that the reason that you have failures of this are because people aren't able to think about how to make the building more adaptable. I think where it's not adaptable, it's because people have not had the incentive to make it adaptable.
The people who are paying the bills don't have the incentive to make it adaptable, which is a shame. I mean, it's nice to make things more adaptable.
Yeah. Well, sometimes. I mean, sometimes it's quite practical to have things quick. The reason that his beloved shipping containers are sometimes used is because you can whack them onto site while you're waiting for the land value to go up or whatever.
Yeah.
And they're not adaptable, actually, at all. And then you can just, it's very easy to take them away afterwards.
Yeah. There's a very funny moment in the book where he has these on-site porta cabins and they're building a building behind it. And he's like, why do they build the building? Why don't they just have these porta cabins forever?
Instead of having a train station or working in a cool office building, you could work in a porta cabin.
Flying in the sky.
In scaffolding.
But then I also kind of think, why do you hate Richard Rogers?
Yeah,
this is such a high tech. This is such a high tech vibe.
Yeah.
You should be friends. This is a real. It's a real
It's funny that that solution feels like he's talking about it 20 years too late. This was
this was a thing people were into in
late
the
60s.
Yeah. Really,
people were doing these except that they would make them out of crinkly bronze to kind of it was definitely a zeitgeisty thing. Yeah. Probably it's like a zeitgeisty thing when he was doing the Whole Earth catalogue or something, and he's kept it in the back of his mind.
Yeah. I feel like we've probably bashed it enough, but there was a moment which this I thought was my
This is a real.
This
is an apples to apples comparison I've had one.
I've got to read it out. Let me
describe the two things, and then we can.
There are two images which are being compared. One is
this is a definite comparison of something is good and something is bad.
It's a classic view of Boulet's monumental library, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry, it's the Metropolitan Cathedral by Boulet.
Yeah, okay.
Which is a piece of paper architecture. He was a revolutionary architect who built very little, maybe possibly nothing at all, and it's this unbelievably vast neoclassical design with enormous columns and then in a huge barrel vault.
And tiny little people at the bottom.
And then there is a underwater photograph of a mother and a baby, and the mother is sort of stroking the baby, and the baby is looking rather blissfully into...
And it's an advertisement for British Gas.
Yeah, I know. And the credit is Water Baby, director Mark Portelli, from a TV commercial for British Gas PLC, which is
okay, so which one of these is good architecture and which one of these is bad architecture?
Two visions of architecture. Boulez, brackets left, wanted people awed, tiny and powerless before the magnificence of the architect's achievement. The mother on the right has a different...
It should be British Gas PLC.
The mother on the right, working for an employee of British Gas PLC, has a different attitude about her creation. A building is not something you finish. A building is something you start. Well...
What the Jiminy Cricket? Where is he coming from with this?
This is not even like a shower thought. Or like, I mean, famously, Stewart Brand had like this big like acid vision where he was like, we need NASA to take a photo of the Earth and share it with everyone, and it's going to transform everyone's consciousness.
Yeah.
But this is not even like an acid vision. What is this? This is beyond banal. It's like...
Firstly, neither of these are real proposals for buildings.
No.
Secondly, one of them is not a proposal for buildings because it is a photograph of a baby swimming.
A swimming baby. Yeah. And they're both pieces of rhetoric.
But one of them is a rhetoric which is you should buy gas from British Gas.
What I think is like wholly disingenuous about this is that he allows that one of them, the baby photo, is a metaphor. But he totally disallows that the Boulez scheme can be meant as anything other than a completely literal architectural proposal about the way that everything should be.
But you know why? It's because people are good. Architects who are not people
ruin
are bad.
Everything. Yeah. We'll put it up on the Insta. It is extremely silly. I mean, there's lots more in there. You could go on and on and on, but I think that...
It's irritating because like there were bits when at the beginning when he was like looking. So there was early on. I like opened the book, and in fact, Luke asked, "Is this something we could do episode about?"
Yeah.
And he'd lent me the book, and I looked at it, and I saw a picture of like people in a room, like a whole series of people in a room, and the room over time. There were a series of these like photographic series. And I thought, oh, that looks cool. He must have like looked at how the room was being used in some way and thought about occupation. And I suppose in a way he sort of does. And it's not that we've been bashing it loads because he says a load of stupid stuff and like has respect for some really stupid authority. He uses ridiculous examples.
Yeah.
But that's not to say that the points aren't relevant and some of the things he says are true. And a lot of the things that he likes, including like the picture of the baby swimming underwater, generally are quite charming. And
I'm also in favour of babies swimming underwater.
It's just that he needs to do a little bit more work and like synthesize it. He hasn't done enough work for this to be a real work of scholarship or something that's really gonna like.
It doesn't tell you.
Help us
it doesn't
design
tell you
buildings better.
Yeah.
He does notionally have some proposals, but they're not really useful.
Like the question of how you design buildings for flexibility or really usability, I think is really interesting. And there are lots of kind of contemporary and other examples of how you do this kind of thing. Some of the ideas are like, I mean, in his idea, all the outside of a building does is weatherproofing and providing visuals. But obviously today, the thermal envelope is really the thing which people are particularly focused on. Like people want buildings to be extremely thermally performant, and predominantly that happens just under the skin. There are different ways you can do it, but and that makes it all a bit more complicated. But like otherwise, I think that the sort of 6 shearing layers are. I can see that definitely being like a kind of helpful little heuristic for how to think about the separability of these different things. But
maybe, but I'm not actually sure. Like, it is fundamentally important that that you can rearrange the surface. For example, you could rearrange the space organization without rearranging the services.
People don't generally want to do that, do they?
Like, is it really important that the skin is separable from the structure?
No, and not actually. Lots of the buildings that he likes that's not the case. They're structural brick buildings. Or
he doesn't even like it when you've got cavity walls.
Mm.
I can see arguments for both sides of it. Like, there's a reason we do it. We're in a very rainy country here. The way we build inside requires the inside to be dry, whereas historically that was an impossibility. So you just did things differently. But people care about like it not being the ambient temperature indoors more than they used to because they can do something about it now.
Yeah.
Also, he has no respect for the idea that architects should, actually as part of their job, consider how the building looks on the outside. And in fact, how the building looks on the inside. The only people he respects who put prestige, like who work on that, it's only really acceptable to him if it is done as a kind of work of naive art. It's never respectable or acceptable for him to consider how a building looks if it is done by an architect.
Yeah.
It is only acceptable if it is done by someone else. For example, an artist.
Yeah.
Or a property developer.
Some people do want
a speculator.
The inside of their building to be designed for them.
And actually, it does matter. I am willing to put a case that it's much better if we can all live in a place with a varied and exciting, visually exciting environment so that we can be surrounded by a certain amount of beauty as opposed to ugliness.
That's better, yeah.
And I think that is part of what people want.
Yeah.
Like, that's not a dirty word.
There's a bit in the TV show where Christopher Alexander says that the rise of people employing interior designers is because they've been psychically brutalized by architects into believing that they can't design their homes for themselves.
This is proper Scientology.
I don't think that is psychologically plausible, actually. If you just think of anyone you've talked to ever, I don't think people are lacking in confidence about how to design their own homes. And I don't think that people who employ interior designers are doing it because they've been hollowed out by the mental warfare of architects.
It is verging on, but this isn't really him. That's Christopher Alexander, who at times verges on, like, mad conspiracy. Philosophy.
That's it. I mean, the review of the book is, for me, it has a lot of promise. The initial 3 chapters, if they were worked into, could be a really interesting book, I think. And the rest of it is extremely scattered, and a lot of it is kind of paraphrasing people that we've already featured on the show and who I strongly disagree with on a lot of things. And
or people who, like, I don't think any of the people we've covered, like, don't make observations that something good is good or something bad is, like, those observations. It's actually easier to say that than, like, why.
Yeah.
And I think if you want to kind of, like, have a thing, there's how in the title of the book.
Yeah.
And he doesn't really say how they learn.
Yeah.
He doesn't say how they learn.
No, that would be a good book, though.
It doesn't say, this isn't a book about how buildings learn.
No. Well, I think that's enough.
Thank you very much. It was a really strange one, this one. It was interesting going through it.
Yeah.
I'd watch the TV show. Yeah, I was going to say, I'd watch the TV show. It does cut out, like, significant chunks of the book, but the bits of the book that it cuts out are kind of pretty scrappy.
Yeah. I think the TV show definitely refines the book down to bits which are a bit more interesting, like the bits which I think are more meaningfully connected with the kind of premise. Yeah.
Like, something we didn't say in the episode, which we should have, is that this very, like, this is an obvious point, but I don't think we said it. This belongs to a thought world of a group of people which is spanning between the new urbanism people and the reactionary people. I would say that, like, squarely belongs in this.
Yeah, but, like, viewed from Silicon Valley, like, that kind of, like, Valley mindset.
Like, I thought it might have been a book which, like, involved a certain amount of, like, longitudinal study, and I thought it might be something a bit like, actually, the architecture of the city. Rossi, which is a kind of slightly kooky, erudite take on how cities learn.
Yeah.
What happens to them after they're founded. And it's not like that. It actually is an assemblage of pieces of kind of opinion from Christopher Alexander, like these various people, Jane Jacobs and a few others, Brian Eno, the Duchess of Devonshire, Duffy.
Yeah.
I guess those are probably the big ones. A little bit from Vincent Scully. He's okay.
Yeah.
For some reason. Mixed with things that Stewart Brand has seen and is interested in. I guess the architecture of the city is kind of things that Rossi has seen and is interested in. But he does then try to produce a kind of theoretical framework of how they work.
Yeah.
And that framework is bonkers. It doesn't really make any sense. But it does show that he's actually mentally interrogating it, and then you can kind of respond to that.
Yeah, I don't know how you would really put this book to work in the end. It does try to offer some principles, but they are so sort of arbitrary and diffuse. They get down to you should use metal studs instead of wood and this kind of thing.
In the maintenance chapter, he offers lots of advice, but the advice is not really sensible. You should ignore it. Some of it is downright wrong.
Yeah.
Factually wrong.
Yeah. Yes, not a building manual. It is literally getting too dark to see.
Okay.
We should call it to a halt. Remember, you can find links to all of the important things supporting the show on our website, which is about buildingsandzities.org. We'll do a bonus.
Yeah.
And we'll be back with something else very soon. Thanks a lot for listening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Night-night.